Our next lecture is Making Technology Work in Education, Outcomes of the EDUsummIT IT 2013. Mrs. Voogt and Gerald Knezek, please take the floor. I have Googled you this morning, and it's written there that she has been appointed professor by special appointment of ICT and curriculum at the University of Amsterdam. Is this relevant to you today?
Yeah.
Very nice. So Google is correct. You see how the information is moving. And Dr. Knezek is Regent Professor of Learning Technologies at the University of North Texas and Director of the Institute for Integration of Technology into Teaching and Learning at this university. He is past president of the Society for Information Technology and Teacher Education. Correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Good Googling. Yes, while Yoko is sitting up, good morning, everyone. Dobre utro, dobre den. Unlike Mariana, я не говорю по-русски. I don't speak Russian and barely English, so I apologize. We'll be speaking in English today. I'll turn this over to Yoko. She will get us started. We will go back and forth during our presentation. Yoko?
Well, thank you very much for inviting us. It's my second time here. I also was here to present the outcomes of the EDUsummIT 2011. I think it was June 2011, immediately after the EDUsummIT. I think it's very useful that you organize these kind of meetings because, as well Mariana Patou says, we can talk at a global level on what has to happen regarding technology and education and making technology work for people, but the hard work has to be done at the level of countries and particularly at the level of schools and in the educational setting. So the teachers are the main group of people who have to make it happen. Our talk is about making technology work in education, outcomes of the EDUsummIT 2013. And that's exactly what the EDUsummIT is all about. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is EDUsummIT, what is this global forum, how did it originate. We will talk about the discussion themes of the 2013 EDUsummIT and elaborate on two of them. Maybe because that were the two we were more actively involved in. And then we will also give a view on the future because we will have the next EDUsummIT in 2015. So what is EDUsummIT and how did it all start? And why are Gerald and me involved in this? Well, basically it started back in 2006 at UNESCO when we were hosted by Mariana Patou as a group of scholars who were invited to make a handbook on information technology in primary and secondary education with the idea we need to synthesize the research of 40 years of computers in education. And Gerald Knezek and I were invited to be editors of that handbook. And what you see on the picture is the group of what we call section editors. People who were responsible for one section of the handbook, and you see Ruben and Iliana, his wife, here at the side. You see Gerald, still very young, at the other end.
Compared to today.
You see Paul Resta, who has been here frequently also before and presenting about his work on the global level, and maybe you would recognize others as well. So we were a group of about 15, I think, who wanted to develop this handbook, next slide, with the aim to synthesize research in education and also to focus on not only researchers, but we wanted to have policymakers and professionals involved, because it's nice to talk among researchers about what we can do with technology in education, but there are other people who have to make it happen. We ended up with a 2-volume handbook, 1,200 pages, 11 sections, 76 chapters. Well, what I already said, and what we were very proud of, that we had 136 authors of 23 countries involved, mainly from all over the world, from many different places in the world. It was a very nice experience for us, of course, but it was also very nice to get these people together and to talk about what we can do in education with technology. This is the book. It was launched in Gothenburg in 2008. But then what did we find from this work? Basically what the research says, yes, technology can enhance teaching and learning. We know that. And we also know under which conditions it will work. But we also needed to recognize and to realize that what is happening in education is not, that there are not many teachers and schools and ministries are taking enough advantage of what technology can do for education. And what we also realize is that with this thick book, you saw the picture, we had made a nice work for PhD students who needed to graduate. It was getting into the university libraries all around the world, but it was not getting into the other parts of our target group, the policymakers and the professionals, the practitioners who have to make it work. So we had that book, but we thought we need to do something about it to bring it into the other arenas in which were so important to us. So that was the reason for getting the EDUsummit. It was the idea we cannot stay with the book, we have to bring what we know from research into practice, but not only one-way direction, we also need to learn from practice to make our research relevant for practice and not doing only as researchers our own hobbies. So we started the EDUsummit, which is now getting into a global community with the idea to move educational forward into the digital age, because we realize that our society is changing and we think we need to give an answer to that changing world. So now I hand over to Gerald, because this is the first EDUsummit coming up.
Yes, basically we've been working now for 8 years, as Ruben mentioned earlier. The first was in 2009 in The Hague, and I would especially like to credit Alphonse ten Brummelhaus. Some of you know him in the room. I think he was very influential in getting this group together. And you may notice some people you recognize in the picture there. About 70 attended. It was a very good session. In fact, we thought we would have only one, but at the end everyone said we should have another one. So thanks to Mariana, Paul Resta, and several others, UNESCO headquarters in Paris sponsored the second one. If you know Where is Waldo, the American book, well, we're over here somewhere. That was our largest gathering. 132 came to that meeting, and it was good, but we found we were getting at the limit of the discussion groups that are the most important part for the outcomes. The third one moved to the USA. It was in Washington, D.C. Some of you probably may remember October 1. And that was the day the U.S. government shut down. We were supposed to have this in the Library of Congress. We had the opening reception there, and then the next day the government closed, and so we moved it to George Washington's home. This is Mount Vernon, the founder of the U.S., and he actually had a beautiful home overlooking the Potomac River. And so this was a group here, about 100. So this is the last one. We'll be presenting mostly the findings from this session, but really cumulative findings today. And so let me turn this back over to Yoka to get started.
So EDUsummit is a working conference. It's not a conference with a lot of presentations, but it's a conference of people working together, often in mixed groups of policymakers, practitioners, and academics. And we wanted to have outputs from these working groups. And the kind of outputs we have is, we have special issues. We have conference papers, we present at conferences like this one. We have scholarly papers, but most important, we prepare our meetings always with pre-summit papers, and there is always a post-summit paper from each working group available, and we try to have a call to action to make our action agenda on what needs to happen, we think which needs to happen to make the most advantages of technology in the educational system. You can find, I'll present the website where you can find all the documents also at the end of our presentation. So, and we also always evaluate the impact of the EDUsummit. We get lots of feedback on what's really happening in countries after people go back, having participated in the EDUsummit working group meetings. Here are a few of the quotes of the things that are going to happen or are already happening because of the EDUsummit. We were actually very proud that it guided the US National Educational Technology Plan in 2010, which was the result of the first EDUsummit. But it's an international summit, so we are also always taking care that we have also representatives from the developing world, and so you see also impact in the policy sector in Bangladesh. And from the 2013 EDUsummit, basically this has resulted in one of the things going to happen in my own country. We will start a national discussion with all stakeholders involved, from pupils to teachers to parents to industry, about what are our core values for education and how can we make our education oriented towards the future. A little bit about the 8 working groups we had for the EDUsummit 2013. As you can see, they are on all different levels. It's about the educational system. It's about mobile and informal mobile learning, formal and informal settings. Marianne already said that it was very important also for UNESCO. Of course, teachers are core, but we know that teachers cannot do without people at other levels of the educational system. So we talked in this group not only about policy, professional development for teachers, which was also for the EDUsummit 2011, which we extended it this year also to see what do we need to do at the level of school leaders and policy makers to make them aware how technology can work for education. Digital equity and intercultural education has always been the topic of the EDUsummit because we think that equity is core in using technologies and access need to be available for everyone in the world. Assessment as for and of 20th century learning skills is an important topic always at the EDUsummit. How can we use technology for the delivery of assessment, and how can we integrate assessment in the learning process? New this year was advancing computational thinking in 21st century learning. We had a big debate about 21st century skills and 21st century learning in the 2011 summit, but we saw all kinds of trends around us that with a focus on computational thinking, so we thought it was important to discuss that topic in 2013. We are always talking about the role research can play in integrating technology in education. And another thing that we think is also very important is to talk about digital citizenship and the importance of literacy all around the world. So that's were the 8 working groups, and each working group had about 10 persons, 10 to 15 persons collaborating on these topics. What came out of the EDUsummit 2013? The action agenda we developed. The issues across all 8 groups was that we need to identify what works and what doesn't work, to locate best practices, to inspire research and practice. The bringing together of formal and informal learning was an important topic. Focusing on assessment, what I already said. Encouraging collaboration within and between constituencies. We think that it's very important to make technology work if different levels within a country collaborate on this topic, but also, of course, at a global level. Using previously successful collaborative research strategies to foster integration of technology in education. When you talk about technology in education, it's not only part of the educational sciences. It's more becoming of an international, interdisciplinary way of working, but it's not only research done by researchers on their own. They need to collaborate with the teachers the practice in order to make research work. And making research accessible. We think also that's very important to have the effects of what we already know into policy and practice. Yes, Nelson? So, and then we have two topics we want to elaborate a little bit upon. I will take the first topic, and Gerald will talk about mobile and using mobile learning to bridge the gap between formal and informal learning. So, I was involved in a working group on advancing computational thinking in 21st century learning. It was a follow-up of the Paris meeting where we talked more generally about 21st century skills and 21st century learning, and which I also mentioned some publications which came out of that meeting. There was a very international group members of this working group. We had people from Finland, from Italy, Czech Republic, Netherlands, USA, Slovenia, Canada. So it was an international group working together for 2 days on this topic. And we had some pre- and post-subject papers which you can find on our website, which I will present at the end. Next slide. The action agenda that came out of this working group on computational thinking was to develop a conceptual framework on what computational thinking is, and so to develop a common vocabulary, to develop measurable attributes and evaluate and assess computational thinking skills, and to identify research approaches and opportunities to study computational thinking in a whole range of areas. Why is computational thinking so important? Well, basically it was Jeanette Wing, she's a computer scientist, who said, well, the kind of ways of problem solving, the kinds of way computer scientists design systems and try to understand human behavior, that are concepts very fundamental to computer science, but actually that should be a kind of attitude and way of working, way of thinking that is universally applicable attitude and skill which is needed for everyone. And that call for attention for computational thinking has started a new wave, I would say, following the work Seymour Papert already did in the 80s and 90s. So because computational thinking as such is not so new, it builds upon the work of Seymour Papert and others, and particularly I think here in Bulgaria there's been quite a lot of work with Logo and what Seymour Papert has been doing. But it was a little bit going back in education worldwide, so it has become a new trend, so to say. What was important in the work of Seymour Papert and his ideas about the importance of Logo programming was that through thinking about programming, students would also adopt to thinking about thinking. That was the idea behind having children involved in Logo programming. However, this transfer to non-programming context did not always happen. It was his dream that it would happen, but it didn't always happen. And we see in lots of results, lots of studies on Seymour Papert's work that results are sometimes inconclusive. Sometimes, yes, there were found significant positive results about this transfer from learning to program to learning to think systematically, but sometimes not. There has been an explanation about why this could happen, and that explanation that is in the distinguishing between low and high transfer. Some scholars made this, try to find the explanation of this inconclusive result in this way. Where low transfer particularly refers to focusing on the programming skills as such, and not on the thinking skills behind it. And high transfer refers to making this explicit, this transition from the programming skills to the thinking skills. And if you do the high road transfer, it's more you can expect this transfer from learning to program to learning to think. That was kind of the explanations for the inconclusive results. And basically, if you say that, then again you say it's instruction that counts. It's the way how you organize your programming classes. If you are just focusing on programming as such, you're not getting the results which you actually want to get. Next slide. Some of the features of computational thinking. I think the main thing is that computational thinking and programming is not the same. And of course, computer science is also more than both of them. But it's about analyzing problems and artifacts. It's about algorithms. It's about being able to move between different levels of abstraction and to decompose problems in different different building blocks and arrange your solution around the different building blocks. It's about developing computational artifacts yourself and understanding data structures and information structures. It's design thinking, basically. There's an emphasis also on debugging. So it's also looking back. It didn't work, or if it doesn't work, you need to debug. Yeah, next slide. But there are lots of challenges around definitions of CT. And I just want to show that by means of an example. This is an example of a advanced placement computer science draft curriculum framework, which was developed in the US for high school. And that curriculum says your computational thinking practices should have the following 6 modules. Connecting computing, that has to do with the importance of technology and the implications on society. Developing computational artifacts. Students should be able to develop computational artifacts themselves, to develop something. Abstracting. Analyzing problems and artifacts. Communicating and collaborating. And if you look at this draft curriculum, you already see where the problems are in defining what exactly computational thinking is. Next slide. Because you see a clear connection with some of the other 21st century skills. For instance, communicating and collaborating is mentioned in each of the frameworks regarding 21st century skills. If you see developing computational artifacts, that also requires creativity, which is mentioned in many of the other 21st century skills. Analyzing problems, problem-solving skills, very important 21st century skills. So it's not so distinct from other 21st century skills. There's a lot of overlap with them. Next slide. So we like to think about, that was the conclusion of the working group in Washington last year, that computational thinking, but also important characteristics of computational thinking, which might be a little bit more in the periphery, but are still important if you want to have a computational thinking in your curriculum in schools. So what we see, how does this debate on the importance of computational thinking travels to schools and to the education system the last years. And that's also one of the things we discussed in the working group. One direction is to have it as a separate subject in the curriculum. And basically that's what they did in England and what they are also doing in Estonia. But in England, for instance, there I have the most information in starting this year, September, with a computer science curriculum for 5 to 16-year-olds. And if you see for the 5 to 7-year-olds, who already are becoming involved in what are all simple, create or in other courses, also to make it not only something which is identified with mathematics and with the STEM subjects, but with a broader curriculum setting. And it is also could also be very interesting to bring it into informal learning centers and make students makers and creators of technology. So that was a little bit what we discussed in this working group at the EDUsummIT and the follow-up given to it, because we are working on this conceptual paper at the moment. We are at this moment finalizing the paper for education and information technologies, and we were also invited to provide a chapter in the book Competence-Based Vocational and Professional Education. See what is computational thinking, how can it be important not only for the compulsory part of schooling but also in the vocational and professional world. So that's how far we came in these 2 days in Washington DC, and we'd like to share that with you. And hand on the floor now to Gerald, who is taking the other.
Yes, let me check on time. Do we have 10 more minutes? Okay. Pardon? Did you say we should stop now?
A bit more.
Oh, a bit more. All right, good. Well, we purposely, thank you.
We have 30 minutes left here.
I understand. But I know I'm between you and your coffee break. So, well, 3 comments to begin with. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here, along with Yoka. And Yoka, we can scoot you a little bit this way. We're blocking the street. Thank you. I wanted to talk about 2 comments about the earlier speakers. One was about upbringing, that Yoka and I are here because our mentors, our senseis, thought we were the next generation to which they would pass the torches. And that was Tier Plump, who was Yoka's major professor that many of you know from IEA and other contacts. And for me, it was Takashi Sakamoto. My first Fulbright appointment was Tokyo Institute of Technology. And I remember he used to say that education exists in all societies for 2 reasons. The first is to transmit skills to the next generation. The second and most important is to transmit culture. Culture is very much along the line in his way of thinking about the upbringing, not only by the parents and society, but by the schools. And so I think that it's also happening in this room. My second little comment is I worked most of my life in the Pacific half of the world, even though my ancestry is Czech. And so I can say Yaksimasha Vitam in a few words. But actually, Ego Wakarimasu ka Skoshi, I speak a little better Japanese than Czech. And that's thanks to Sakamoto Sensei and others. So I think the idea here is that it's a small world, that all of us work together and we actually are upbringing each other. So the first topic of the 8 we thought we would talk about is more of a theoretical one, computational thinking. The second one is a little bit more practical, applied, and lots of current issues. There were many participants in this group. This is a list of all of them. I won't go through the countries, but there were numerous. And I would mention, next slide, that if we look at this topic has been a theme throughout 6 years of the 8 years of the EDUsummIT, and it keeps getting stronger and stronger, especially the bridging formal and informal learning part through mobile technologies. From 2009, one of the main action items was to establish a clear view of the role of ICT in 21st century learning and its implications for formal and informal learning. That is, already the recognition was that students had 10 times as much exposure through their information technologies to potential learning time outside of school to what they had in school. So how can we channel that in a proper way? And then, next slide. If we go to 2011, the Paris EDUsummIT, one of the quotes here is, "The emergence of mobile devices with ubiquitous network access has spurred interest in mobile and informal learning as alternatives to traditional formal training." This will be a theme throughout, sort of the tension we'll come to at the end between all of us using our smartphones for texting and accessing information we need versus the formal structure of a classroom that has worked well for maybe 100 or 200 years, and how do we somehow blend those so it's productive for everyone? Next slide. We started out at 2011 saying at least we could draw pictures, and this is actually from Dr. Kadaj's dissertation, and Mariana mentioned the 2015 mobile event in Paris, and she will be working, I believe, with Mariana on that event. The idea is that we have formal learning that was traditionally in the classroom, informal learning that was whatever avenue, including your parents, that you could get to before. And then somehow in between we have this blend, and it's through social platforms and those kinds of things. But more and more we have informal learning driving what happens in the classroom, as well as what our National Science Foundation calls out-of-school time coordinated in-school time. That is, students can work at home and do many things if they're guided well by their teachers in class. Next slide. 2013, which is the main point today, advancing mobile learning in formal and informal settings. And so next slide. Yoka mentioned the working groups. This was working group 2. I just highlighted it in green. You've heard of that, so we will move on. Primarily, we have done 2 papers that you can look up on the web if you wish. A position paper that was led by Kwok Wing Lai of the University of Otago in New Zealand. Dr. Kadaj was originally from Lebanon, but was most of her adult life in Australia at Deakin University. And so, a bit like myself, bridges 2 cultures. Myself was in this group for each of the years, and I'll report on that today. Next slide. The second paper, which Yoka mentioned, we're hoping the day after this conference that we will finalize this special edition coming out of EDUsummIT 2013, so look for it. Many of the bullets I'll give you today are from this paper. That is by several authors. And I wanted to start with quotes from the abstract. We're moving headlong into the age of mobilization. Some of you may know Dr. Soloway from the University of Michigan. He's very bubbly and very energetic. He says it's mobilism is the new word that we will have in the dictionary soon, where everything is mobile, maybe our clothes as well. The second quote, it has been estimated that the number of mobile subscribers, you heard this from Mariana, soon there will be mobile subscriptions greater than the number of people in the world. My second full ride appointment was in Ecuador, and I was so surprised that people didn't have televisions, but they all had mobile phones. And so it's happening everywhere. The third point, growth rates of mobile phone subscribers is the greatest actually in the less economically advanced countries. And that's a trend we have to capitalize to bring up the bottom, as was spoken about today. Next slide. So bridging formal and informal learning. Recommendations for action that I thought were important from the overall group relevant here. Identifying what works is one of the main themes that came out of this discussion in Washington, D.C. Locating best practices is another. Bridging formal and informal learning, which we're focusing on here, and making research accessible. And I would just add that one of the reasons Yoka and I are so honored to be here today is that last one, making research accessible. EDUsummIT is about 1/3 researchers. They're a lot of the best in the world. And so we asked them sort of to look 5 years backwards and 10 or 15 forward. And so we hope to be bringing the synthesis of what all of those are thinking together. And so we're happy to be here. Next slide. 2 main recommendations for this group, the call to action. One is develop criteria for identifying best practices and models of mobile learning. I will show in a slide or 2 some that are not the best and some that might be. And then next slide. The second is to develop guidelines and strategies to tackle challenges of mobile learning. There are many, from bring your own device, which every teacher, including me, hates when you're the teacher, to issues such as do parents or do the children or do the publishers own the data in the cloud when the students are using their devices. And that's a big issue. Next slide. Practically speaking, when we sat down in DC, we came out with PowerPoint bullets, and I wanted to show you some of these for the action plan related to those 2 written ones. Really what we're talking about for best practices is we need some kind of a matrix about evidence-based, culturally sensitive, curriculum-centered, flexible, and scalable mobile implementations that allow for pedagogical changes, especially student-directed learning. Constructivism is probably, we're in one of the areas of the world where it was pioneered. And how is that applicable in both formal and informal contexts? So this is really what the group came out with as its bulleted slide. Next slide. Likewise, for recommendation number 2, guidelines and strategies should be developed to tackle these kinds of challenges. Bring your own device, interface design, is it the same everywhere in the world? Cross-platform problems are tremendous. We don't know if right now if the Apple approach or the Google approach or maybe something else will win. Teacher preparation and quality of learning outcomes was already mentioned today. It's a most serious problem, a very, very important one. And then bridging learning across settings and contexts. And so somehow we need to attack all these problems and we don't know the answer yet. Next slide. So that leads us to challenges. Well, you probably know them. Some schools, especially in the US, there's a basket by the door and the teacher has the students put their mobile phones in the basket, and some of them start with the basket empty, and as soon as they see them texting, it goes in the basket. So even though we promote this, actually it's banned in most of our classrooms of formal learning. Policies for students bringing their own devices. Well, we can't control, we have no idea what's on them, including some of the content that was spoken about earlier. And I myself am starting to teach from the back of the room in my university classes because these days they're like junior high students. They can't not look at everything that's in front of them from the cloud, and so it's a new generation, and I'm not sure what the solution is. Students not using mobile devices for intentional learning purposes, I think that's the one I just alluded to. The need to change assessment practices. In our learning technologies department, we say that the final test is if our students can build something new and it works, well, that's the best assessment. And yet, the quote from Texas, that's my home. So it's now no child left behind. We've been testing people to death for 10 or 15 years. Yes, it didn't work. So somehow, if we have the opportunity with these mobile devices to say, yes, you proved you can do it because what you built works. And if we get to that point, I think we're in a better situation. Equity issues. Most of you know that even though the device is practically free in lots of parts of the world, paying for it month to month is more than people might pay for the energy for their home or their food. And so that's a serious issue. It's relevant to the broadband one that Mariana was talking about. Cultural issues and using mobile devices in different contexts. It's just not. We even have problems in my graduate classes in the US with especially people from many different parts of the world. And most of them bring with them their norms from their home cultures. But from Japan to China to Thailand is not even the same as far as what's proper and improper. If you mix that with what's proper in the Middle East, and also in lots of parts of Europe, it's really can be chaotic. It can do lots of damage. So we have to be sensitive to that. Cross-platform issues are really on the scene. Ideally, it wouldn't matter very soon when you have an object that comes from the cloud. It would know what kind of device you're trying to look at it on. We're not there yet, and maybe 10 or 15 years from now that will be the case, but it's a serious issue. Design challenges, size of screen. This is one of the areas where Dr. Soloway and Dr. Norris, my colleague at UNT, are working. Is it going to be a tablet? Is it going to be an iPhone 6? Is it Samsung size? We don't know, and I'll get to it in a moment, but the Singapore data seems to show that actually there's some advantages to having a small screen so that students don't always automatically go to Googling the favorite website. So it's not clear, in my opinion, which is best. Health and safety issues, you all know about those. Being sedentary is a big issue if you're nothing but on the web and never outside. We have one proposal in our own university for augmented virtual reality that's GPS located with our Arboretum. That is hopefully a combination of both. And are we still okay on time?
We have to stop.
Yeah. And
40 minutes.
I think it's time to, I should stop now. We'll field questions, and so thank you very much.
Are there any questions? Maybe during the coffee break or the break in coffee, we will have the chance. Thank you very much once again.
All right. Thank you.